I like Jason Stiles. Jason certainly has his flaws, and I don't think that he and Lorelai would work in the long term for reasons that I'll discuss, but I like him. I just can't help but feel a little bit bad for him sometimes. And when we first meet him, I think we meet him at a weird place in his life. He kind of reminds me of the narrator in Fight Club, someone who's just now realizing that he spent his entire life in a hamster wheel. I think he woke up one morning and said, enough is enough. So, what happened to lead him to this point? I think that Jason's parents treated him like crap, and I think that that's the catalyst for Jason's actions. I want to focus on Jason's decision to start his own business. I can understand why many people would see this as a red flag, and I would agree that revenge is not a good reason to start your own business. However, the way in which Jason talks about his life and the way in which Floyd, his father, talks to him really makes me think that Jason had a good reason for leaving. Jason tells Richard that he doesn't hate his father, he just doesn't want to be him. And what I think is so notable is that Jason says that he wants to get through an entire day of work without being called digger. What that sounds like to me is someone who feels like he's been devalued at home by his own family and who's been devalued at his workplace. I think it's also worth noting that Jason does everything by the book. He's not stealing clients from his father. He's only taking clients that he's contractually allowed to take. Presumably, these are the clients that he himself has acquired for the firm, so he's used his own sweat and labor to find business for the firm, to build these relationships and to maintain these relationships. So what do we know about Jason's parents? We know that his parents don't approve of any woman that he's with, and that includes women that they themselves have set him up with. His mom is a little bit more elusive, but she strikes me as someone who's very uninvolved. She doesn't seem to take an interest in Jason's life.
How's your mother?
She's exactly the same.
And her horses?
Have a better life than I do.
Imagine if you took these functions away from her, what would she have left?
More time with Pool Boy? I talked to Mom, but she just had her morning Mr. Happy pill, so of course she was having a happy morning and was absolutely no help.
At first, when we meet Jason's mom, she seems like a very sweet woman. Jason's parents come over to the Gilmore house for dinner, and right away, Jason's mom becomes buddy-buddy with Emily. But when we reach the final scene of the episode and we see the men come out of the room, his mom becomes very evasive. So it's very clear that she knew from the very beginning that her husband was about to threaten a lawsuit. So she's sitting there pretending with Emily, pretending that everything is going to be fine and they're going to be friends again, knowing full well that her husband is about to sue Emily's husband. She's also very calm with the fact that her husband is about to threaten a lawsuit against her own son. How fucked do things have to get that you reach this point? Jason's dad, Floyd, is so ruthless. I know that Richard is also portrayed as a very distant grandfather on the show, but Floyd really takes it to the next level. The conversation that he has with Jason is just a conversation between two strangers. It is so insanely cold, and I just have to wonder, what is it like to live in a home where that's how you communicate with your own father? Not only is he threatening his son with a lawsuit, but he hired a private investigator to follow Jason around. And he knows that Jason is not doing anything illegal. So Floyd is bringing a frivolous lawsuit to bury his son in legal fees, knowing very well that his son did nothing wrong. Jason's quirks.
He's very off-center.
When I rewatched Jason's scenes, his quirks didn't really feel like quirks to me. They felt like coping mechanisms. And I think that Jason might be an introvert, which is not a quirk by any means, but I do want to touch on this point. So he selects a private room on his first date with Lorelai, and that in and of itself is not a sign that someone's an introvert. However, he does say that he does prefer it and that with all the people in the noise, he can't even hear himself think. So he might be someone who is overstimulated by his environment. Another quirk of Jason is that he keeps a very simple aesthetic home, which again, not fully a quirk, but he doesn't like to have any tchotchkes lying around, and that could also be a sign of someone who could be overwhelmed by their environment, so they prefer to have a very clean aesthetic. Another one of Jason's quote-unquote quirks is his inability to sleep in the same bed with somebody else. Jason explains it as the fact that he's a light sleeper and he can't have any distraction or he won't be able to sleep. So as a light sleeper myself, I can relate to this, and I just have to say that insomnia, it really sucks. Insomnia doesn't come out of nowhere. There's usually a reason, and stress is a common cause. The other thing is when someone is a very light sleeper and they're experiencing insomnia, having someone next to you or in the same room just builds on that anxiety because you're lying there trying to fall asleep. And anytime you move, you have this fear that, oh gosh, now I'm waking the other person up. Every second that you try to shift, you feel more and more guilty because now you're not just ruining your own night, but you could be ruining someone else's night. And so then it just becomes this vicious cycle in your head. So if I was on a date with someone and they tell me that they cannot sleep in the same bed with me, but they still want me to stay, I wouldn't be mad, I wouldn't be upset, but I would be very concerned. This is something that a person has to address. It feels like a band-aid on a problem that requires more attentive care. I've seen Jason get criticized not so much on the fact that he has trouble sleeping, but based on the fact that he didn't tell Lorelai in advance. And I do think it is a good idea to share that kind of information in advance. It is hard when you just start dating someone or you're out on a first date, so you don't know how to slip in that information into a conversation without sounding presumptuous that the person's going to come over. It is kind of a delicate thing to bring up, and so I could see why someone would fail to mention it the very first time. Yet another one of Jason's quote-unquote quirks is his inability to go to a funeral. And when I first heard Jason say that he couldn't go to Richard's mother's funeral, I thought, well, okay, that's kind of rude. But then you get his full explanation. So Jason cannot go to funerals because when he was 10 years old, for an entire year, his family lost a member every single month, which would mean about, 12 family members. But let's say he was exaggerating slightly. Let's say it was 8 family members. Still, when you think about that, that's a lot. And I think it's easy to just sort of assume, well, it could have been great uncles, it could have been an aunt 4 times removed from the family, people who are elderly. But what if it wasn't? What if when he was 10 years old, what he had to witness was losing some of his grandparents, losing maybe his cousins who were close to his age, to see his aunts and uncles crying over the loss of a child? Even 8 family members is a lot to deal with, especially when you're 10 years old and you have fully confronted death. I could see how that could impact someone and could traumatize them as a child. Maybe that also explains Jason's mother. Maybe Jason's mother lost someone like a twin brother and they never recovered from it. And so they've become more disinterested as a result and started to self-medicate. This is not something that I would judge a person for not being able to attend a funeral, but it just makes me feel like, man, buddy, just have you spoken to somebody? Just Jason, just talk to somebody. You have to deal with what happened. You can't spend the rest of your life avoiding funerals and avoiding any sort of wake because that's just a part of life. We do see in the revival A Year in the Life that Jason does attend Richard's wake, so I like to think that he has overcome this aspect of his life. I want to focus on some of the critiques that Jason has received, and he has received a lot, so I'm not going to focus on all of them, but I want to point out a few. One potential problem is the fact that Jason works a lot. When he visits Lorelai in Stars Hollow, we can see that he's on the phone the whole time. He said that he took the morning off, but that he really doesn't get a morning off. Now, this really becomes relatable if you have people close to you that have experienced this, or when you're put in the same situation. It really feels like he's a man who's kind of at the mercy of his clients. He's building new business and he really can't say no because he knows that if he says no, someone else is going to say yes. It doesn't seem like he's actually enjoying the fact that he's working on the day off, and it really feels like it's something that he feels like he has to do in order to build up the new business that he has with Richard.
Bye. Oh, I'm exhausted.
Another critique about Jason is the fact that he tries way too hard to get Lorelai to go out with him. And this is something that I really didn't pay that much attention to when I first watched the show, but when I rewatched it, I did start to notice this as well, and I do think it's a valid critique. I think he does try a little too hard, so I have a theory on this. My theory is that Jason had a crush on Lorelai ever since they were at summer camp, and he might have been one of those kids that was picked on a lot because of his quirks, and Lorelai might have been one of those kids that was well-liked. So back when they were kids, he didn't stand a chance. Once he saw her as an adult, after he had grown into himself and become more confident, and now he's at the stage where he's turning over a new leaf, he wants to be his own man, he saw her and he saw it as a second chance. Another criticism of Jason is that people perceive him as someone who might be very stuffy, snobbish, condescending, a very typical businessman, but I never really got that impression from his scenes. What I see is someone who was groomed to fit into a certain lifestyle, but who never quite fit in. A really good example of this is when he's out playing golf and you see that he's clearly uncomfortable. All the other men are making fun of him, and he says,
"Why can't businessmen do deals over air hockey?"
Some of Jason's traits also seem kind of similar to Lorelai's. He banters in a similar way. He says things that are sometimes very similar to how Lorelai would speak.
You wouldn't be curious about pink marshmallow coconut balls? Who makes these? How did the decision to dye the coconut pink occur? Why are they shaped like a chest? Is there any...
He strikes me as someone who also came from the same world as Lorelai and who could have ended up in a different place if he left sooner, just like Lorelai did. Another criticism of Jason is the fact that he was tailgating Luke when he came to Stars Hollow, and I'm not going to defend this one. I think that tailgating is a very rude thing to do. I don't hate Jason because of it. I'm not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but definitely not defending tailgating. All right, so here's a big one. Jason's decision to sue Richard, and I do think that most of the fandom is in agreement on the fact that Jason kind of didn't have a choice. So what ends up happening is that Richard went back to Floyd. He took all of Jason's clients, and that includes clients that Jason acquired while he was working for Floyd, and new clients that he got since he left Floyd. Jason also says that Richard is bad-mouthing him around town. Now, did Jason really have to sue? At first, I thought that was the only option, but now that I think about it,
you have a choice. You don't have a good choice, but you have a choice.
It's not easy to start over at 37 years old, also knowing that you have international clients, so this business is not really limited to Connecticut. He would pretty much have to leave the industry altogether if he has to start over, and for his mental health, I think maybe that might have been the way to go, even though at the end of the day, I would not judge someone for not making that decision, because back in the early 2000s, it wasn't as easy as it is today to try to pick up a new skill, to go online, and to try to learn something new. It was still possible, but very difficult. So why do I like Jason? He has a lot of witty dialogue, he's very smart, he's very clever when he gets himself invited to dinner at Richard and Emily's house. He knows how to cook. We see him making breakfast and dinner for Lorelai. He works hard and he's ambitious. By the time that Lorelai gets up, he's already gone out for a run, he did laundry, he read the paper, and he made breakfast.
Yes, and by the way, that whole ozone layer problem, taken care of.
He's with Lorelai at the time of her life when she's also very busy, so they make sense together in that particular moment. Jason is also very overt and clear in expressing his feelings for Lorelai. He doesn't beat around the bush. He tells her that he's committed. When he comes back from a business trip from Australia, he tells her that he thought about her a lot. Jason is the one who wanted to be open about his relationship with Richard and Emily, and it was Lorelai who didn't want to. I like the fact that Jason made a key for Lorelai for his apartment. He wants to take an active step forward, and he has a very heartfelt conversation with her. It is a good sign when a person really tries to communicate in a relationship. All right, so then why do I not think that they would work? First of all, the lawsuit. Lawsuits are bloody, and I think that at this point, Lorelai doesn't want to push her parents away completely. And I think she is doing it for Rory, the relationship with her parents, but I think she's also doing it for herself. At this point, she's had many Friday night dinners with them, and I think that a part of her really does want to reconnect with them. Even if the lawsuit never happened, Lorelai likes Luke. And from their interactions, I feel like Jason liked Lorelai a lot more than she liked him, so there would always be a part of Lorelai that would be pining for Luke, and so that would damage the relationship between her and Jason. Even if, let's say, Lorelai got over Luke, Luke still likes Lorelai, so Jason coming to Stars Hollow would be very awkward knowing that Luke likes Lorelai and the rest of the town knows that Luke likes Lorelai. But let's move that aside. Let's say Lorelai gets over Luke and Luke gets over Lorelai. Well, Jason still works a lot, and I think that he will have trouble fitting into Stars Hollow. He doesn't strike me as the type of character who would fit into the town, and ultimately I would see a lot of challenges between Lorelai and Jason when it comes to him working so much and him living in Stars Hollow. So that's my take on Jason. Ultimately, I like Jason. If I were to set Jason up with anybody, I think I would do it with the therapist that Emily tried to set Christopher up with in the later seasons. I hope that by the time that we reached the revival, that Jason has worked through all those things that were bothering him and that he is living a much happier life. Thank you again if you've made it all the way to the end. This was a little bit more of a rant than it was a regular video essay. I guess I was not projecting. Okay, maybe I was, but Sometimes I think you have to be just weird and get personal with video essays because, who cares? So if you've listened to it, thank you. If you have your own thoughts on Jason, I would love to hear them. Even if they're not favorable, that's totally fine. I know that not everyone agrees on characters, and this is, I think, one of those shows where there's a lot of different opinions, so I would definitely love to hear yours.